Hello and welcome back to another video. This one is going to be an update to a tool called Distant and the associated NeoVim plugin distant.nvim. And in the last video that I made of this, I demonstrated some of the basic functionality and how you would get stood up. And there's actually been a bit of an overhaul since then. A couple of things have changed, and I want to show what those are in terms of what has changed as a user of the plugin, what new features are available, and kind of the direction it's going. So let me start by opening up NeoVim. And the very first thing I'm going to demonstrate is the fact that whereas this plugin before used to talk to a local binary, it would start off, it would spin up, and that would be running separately, kind of like a language server it would talk to, but its own system. This is now baked into NeoVim as a Lua module that is a compiled shared library. And when you first install the plugin, you don't have that library. So the very first thing you do is you do distant install, and this will say, hey, you don't have the library available. What do you want to do? And there are three options you can use. You can download a pre-built library, you can build from source, or you can copy a pre-built library you've already downloaded locally onto your machine. And so in my case, I am going to download a pre-built library. What it does is it queries GitHub for the releases. In this case, the only version that actually is available that works at this point with the plugin is the official 0.15.0 release. So I'm going to download that, and behind the scenes, it'll use one of three tools: curl, wget, or fetch to get the library and install it. So at this point, it is available. And I'm going to do the next process like I did before, which is I'm going to start a remote server to be able to talk to. And to do this, you do distant launch, and I'm going to give it an IP address, so 232.399.28128. In this case, I need to be root when I want to connect. If I try to connect with my regular account, there is no matching regular account on this Linode instance. By the way, the Linode instance is this one here. So with that in mind, whoops, let me start that again. All the commands now accept additional parameters that you can give. And in this case, with launch, there's an ssh.user parameter that I will set to root. And this lets you configure some of the properties you used to be able to do through the command line interface. And the first thing you'll notice here is, so I've not SSH'd into this machine before, at least not from this machine that I'm using. And normally if you're using the SSH client, it would say, hey, do you want to verify his fingerprint, blah, 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 blah. Notice how this is native to NeoVim instead of being spawned in an external terminal. That's because the Lua module that we use now provides native SSH controls into NeoVim. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to accept this fingerprint, and now it asks me for my password. Once again, this is just a prompt within NeoVim itself. This is not an external terminal. So I will provide my credentials, and we are now signed in. And if I run distant session info like before, you'll see it looks a little different now, but we have a TCP connection to this address with this port. The tag, depending on what kind of connection you're using, might change. In this case, it just mirrors whatever the address is. And we have no remote files open. So with that, I can do something like distant open, just like before. I believe I'll open it for the root. And we've got files like before, like some file txt. I can write more content and save it. And if I go over to the remote section and I SSH into this server as root, if I enter this IP address again, you will see that we have some file, and if I cat it, you can see that we've got more content. So it is indeed updating the remote file's contents, just like before. And I do have a distant binary. So if I do which distant, you'll see it's located in user local bin distant. Now I'm going to do something different. I'm going to delete this binary off my system such that it won't be able to run anymore. So let me just exit out of Vim first and delete it. So now there is no distant. And if you try to go into your session, you try to spawn it this way like usual, and you give the password, you're going to get an error saying, hey, the command's not found. I can't run this because I don't have a distant server. And I know a couple of folks were concerned, like, hey, I have to put another server on my remote machine. That's hard to do, or I can't get security permission to do that. Well, there's now another mode available. So if you do mode equals SSH as one of the options, and we sign in, we are now connected and acting as an SSH client. Notice how it says in-memory stream. You don't have to really know what that means, but we are now connected not using a distant server. And so I can still do the same things before. I can open up. It takes a little bit longer. Notice that's a little bit slower, but I can still open up, and I can open files, and I can write even more content and save. And if I go back over to this SSH session, I can cat out the file, and there you go. So the way this works is that essentially the SSH connection is never closed, and it turns the distant session into an SSH client session powered by a mixture of exec channels and SFTP channels to let you do file reading and writing as well as executing processes. So if I do something like distant run ls-l, it actually runs this process just like you would with SSH and gives you the results. So that's one of the big changes, is that you don't have to use a distant server anymore. You can actually use the SSH server and just maintain that connection. Now, reasons to not do this, well, of course, if you want to have a more reliable connection, more stable commands, more flexibility, the distant server is going to give you that. And as it continues to get developed, there'll be more features that an SSH client itself just won't be able to do, or at least not do efficiently. So those are the main features. And the last thing I'll show is just the fact that there is now an official help doc for distant. And it answers a lot of different questions. So if we jump down to the table of contents here, we have a quick start guide that just explains entirely getting set up. We have installation, which covers the installation choices you saw earlier when I ran distant install. It gives you the list of commands and what they do and the parameters they have available, settings, so on and so forth. For example, if I jump to commands, it gives you a breakdown as to how you provide arguments to it, what they look like. So for example, distant open, what it takes, next some examples of how you might use it. Distant launch has a lot of different options, including the mode I mentioned, and explains what that does and how it works. So if you ever need to get some information about how to use this tool, how it works, or if you want to do things like maybe how to use the functions and the blocking versus async functions, which themselves have been refactored to be more straightforward. It's just the same function name from the same path. It's just whether or not you provide a callback as the last argument. And if there's no callback, it's synchronous. If there is a callback, it's asynchronous, powered by NeoVim's event loop. So, a couple of changes. The main ones are the fact that you do need this distant Lua shared object available on Windows, Mac, and Linux. And you can, of course, build it from source on other platforms. But it provides native SSH within NeoVim, so you can do all the authentication and verification within NeoVim directly. It provides you with an SSH mode to do communication instead of needing to do a distant server. And of course, provides some other niceties and changes. There's also going to be a changelog from now on for distant. So if you want to see what changes over time, I'm not going to go back and explain everything beyond this version, but we do have a tagged version of 0.1.0 for this plugin, and has some additional things on top. But this means you can start to tag your use of the plugin to a specific tag on GitHub. That way, if things do change or break, you're not immediately affected by the changes. You can keep yourself consistent with that. And that's it. That's it for the features, the new ones that we've got today. And hope this helps some of you to use this tool.